We could talk about Charlie Hebdo cartoons, but what about Ahmed Abu Talib? Ahmed Abu Talib, that name doesn't sound like somebody who's the mayor of a western city, but he is. Ahmed Abu Talib was born in Morocco, arrived in the Netherlands when he was 15. He's now the mayor of the second largest city in that country, which many would still call Holland. He's the mayor of Rotterdam. He is telling fellow Muslims who do not appreciate the, quote, freedoms of living in the West to, quote, pack your bags, and then he F-bombed them on live television. Yeah, he said if you don't like freedom here, you don't like freedom of expression here, you don't like what the people at Charlie Hebdo stood for, you don't like that stuff, that's what we're about here in the West. That's what we're about in Western civilization, and if you don't like it, pack your bags and bleep off. I want to ask Patrick Basham about this. Patrick Basham is with the Democracy Institute. He joins us from time to time from Washington. We'll talk about John Baird's trip to Egypt. We'll talk about Ukraine. We'll talk about a lot of other things. But, Patrick, what's your visceral reaction to this particular mayor? Does this kind of rhetoric have impact? Does it send a message?
You know, I think it does. My visceral reaction is the same as I would guess as much of your listeners, which is he's saying something that many of us feel and think, which is we are perfectly comfortable with living in a society that is full not simply of those who were born elsewhere, but those who practice a religion that isn't the majority of religion in our society. No problem whatsoever. Where we have a problem, and I think this is where what he's crudely getting at, what we have a problem with is when those who enjoy our freedoms and exploit our tolerance turn around and either literally or figuratively attack us and our society. So obviously no rational person wants to either coercively deport or advocate the departure of practicing Muslims in our society. But what he's really getting at is the fact that there is a minority of the minority of Muslims in our respective societies that don't seem to get it, don't seem to get the fact that they enjoy a freedom and a degree of acceptance and tolerance and appreciation that the societies that they either envy or that they wish to create would not allow them to enjoy, and certainly not the rest of us.
It is incomprehensible, I'm quoting this mayor of Rotterdam, the Netherlands. It is incomprehensible that you can turn against freedom, but if you don't like freedom, for heaven's sake, pack your bags and leave. If you do not like it here in the Netherlands, because some humorists you don't like are making a newspaper, may I then say you can bleep off? And it was the F-bomb. Patrick Basham, he's a Muslim. If he was not a Muslim saying the same things, would the usual suspects be saying the same things about how out of touch he is, how insensitive he is, how intolerant he is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Today's political climate throughout much of the West is very sadly determined by the reaction and the response to what one says is determined not by the content of one's words, the substance and the significance of what one has to say, but rather by the color of the skin or the religion that's practiced by the person who is speaking those words. And of course, also one's gender can come into that as well. So the average person is not interpreting words through that prism, but your average mainstream media outlet appears to be. That appears to be how the editorial decisions are being made in terms of who's wearing a black hat, who's wearing a white hat, who's who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. So there's no question that what is being said by the mayor of Rotterdam would be tantamount. Well, the person who said it, if they weren't Muslim, would be the first one on the list for deportation, just for the simple fact that they were offering such a strong comment about those who practice a different religion from him or herself.
So we're living in a society, and this isn't a legal thing, it's a cultural thing. We're living in a society that discriminates against people who are not Muslims. If you're not Muslim, you can't tell a Muslim the truth.
There are certainly well-documented cases where that is the situation. The cultural reaction, or at least the elite cultural reaction, suggests that is the case. It's something which, in the publishing world, I think they refer to it as voice appropriation. There was there was a situation in Canada a couple of decades ago where it was deemed no longer appropriate for the government to give all these publishing grants to writers, etc., if they weren't writing in their own voice. So a white Christian guy was no longer to be subsidized if he was writing stories that, told the story, spoke in the voice of, a black female or whatever. Well, today, might be a Muslim. So apparently voice appropriation is one of the great cultural sins. And, it was tagged as a sin some time ago. And it's now reached something of a critical mass, at least within the elites, at least within the mainstream media. I think a classic case and a real-time case of how the average person holds a different view and sees the world through a completely different prism than those who spend much of their time telling those average folks how they should see the world, how they should think, and how they should act.
No, I was sitting exactly the same spot I'm in right now, Patrick Basham, just a few weeks ago, and an Aboriginal activist was sitting just a few feet to the left of me. She had the microphone. Her name was Joan Jack, and she was talking about the moose in the room. In this particular case, the moose in the room was some Aboriginal males who were a threat to some Aboriginal females. Without getting into the entire story, the point is the things that she was saying, including the discussion of the moose in the room, were things that she could say fearlessly. She didn't have to worry that somebody was going to call her a racist for saying this. It was an Aboriginal on Aboriginal discussion. But if I had said exactly the same things, I would be not legally charged, but culturally charged with stoking the fires of racism.
Oh, no question. I mean, I accept your example fully. I think many of us who have a public profile to any degree and are not on the far left of the political spectrum do experience this very problem. And so we're at a point now, socially, culturally, where clearly it is more important to have the correct opinion, that is the politically correct opinion, than it is to be accurate, to have a correct opinion based on evidence and facts and logic. So being correct in terms of facts and logic is recognized as something of value, but it is overwhelmed, it is superseded by political correctness. So one must be racially, culturally, religiously correct first. Then you start worrying about whether your arithmetic adds up. If you do it the other way around, the old-fashioned way, then you're just in for a whole world of trouble, as you well know.
Yeah, there was a time when political correctness simply annoyed me because what I do for a living is communicate, and I'm not going to, turn every conversation into something that is so bland that nobody will even remember what they heard in order not to tick people off. So naturally it annoyed me. But now I think of it as dangerous.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've had, over the decades, when I was a much younger man, I used to get into arguments when this whole political correctness thing started with people who would wonder why I would get so wound up about specific words being used or no longer used, or the way that language was being messed around with. I mean, what does it matter? It just makes some people feel better. It's no skin off our noses. And I'd always refer them to that great essay by George Orwell, the the literally and figuratively great socialist writer, before the Second World War, who wrote a fantastic essay on the politics of language and how important it is. It's important the words we choose, the words we're allowed to choose, because over time, the words we use affect the way we think. And there's just, there's a causal relationship there. And it's not always apparent at first. But if you allow our freedom of expression in any sense to be constrained and be infringed just to, quote unquote, be polite or to make people feel better, eventually you have to affect the way that we think, the way that first we're allowed to think, and then the way that we actually think. And that is so, so dangerous. And that is, sadly, we're quite well along that path now, because for 20, 25 years, we've really allowed this political correctness to seep into our lives, seep into our society, seep into our culture. It's now seeped into our politics. And, I mean, is there any going back? I'm not sure, but it's a heck of a fight.
Patrick Basham will continue with you in just a few moments. Patrick Basham is with the Democracy Institute, and he was referring to Feel Good a few moments ago. And one wonders, millions of copies of Charlie Hebdo are being sold. You've got people all over the country looking for the magazine. They can find it in some places, not in others. And one wonders, if millions get sold, is that just a feel good? Does that make us feel good, make us feel that we're standing up for something? Does it have any substantive effect, any positive consequence on putting a stop to terrorism? I don't think so. That doesn't mean I don't want you to support Charlie Hebdo. I'm just saying I don't know whether it's an effective way of stopping terrorism. I think sometimes it does take something old-fashioned like bullets and bombs to do that. But we'll discuss it with Patrick Basham next.
Charles Adler on 680 CJOB. Things are about to get interesting on 680 CJOB.
Patrick Basham's at the Democracy Institute in Washington. So let's say millions of people are this week buying the new Charlie Hebdo. They couldn't publish for a few days. Naturally, it's a weekly magazine. They're now publishing. They've got another cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad, and people feel very good about themselves that they can get their hands on this. Je suis Charlie, all the rest of it. Here's my question. Does it have any impact, not on people feeling good about themselves, that's wonderful, but does it have any impact on the so-called war on terror? Patrick Basham.
Absolutely none. I say that with great sadness and regret. Yes, people feel better about themselves for buying the magazine, as I think they should. I think it's a wonderful and noble thing to do. I think the magazine has been very courageous over the years. That obviously continues, and we should applaud them for their mission. But it's not as if this is a message that will resonate with the terrorists, because one could argue that, well, millions of people buying the magazine is a tangible demonstration that in the West we value free speech and freedom of expression, and we're not going to be cowed by violence or the threat of violence. That's good because only to the extent that it works in a Western society with a Western mindset. The terrorists are not the least bit interested in, to the extent to which we value or don't value freedom of speech and freedom of expression. They couldn't care less about public opinion here, there, or anywhere. They have a worldview that they know to be the right one, the correct one, the one that the prophet, they allege, has, deemed fit for this world. And they are going in their various ways to do their very best to install that world. And we are simply in their way. Therefore, they have no interest in reasoning with us, talking with us, negotiating with us, because we are an obstacle to what they wish to achieve. And that is why, in its most radical form, with the ISIS organizations of this world, when they take over one of these villages, they give a very simple choice to the villagers. Join us in our fight, or die. And if you don't join them, they kill you. They don't sit down and give a lesson in what they believe and why you should believe it and how it would be a better world if we all sort of held hands and linked arms and believed the same thing. They simply kill you if you don't pick up a rifle on their part. So we're dealing with an enemy that has a sort of 12th century view of things and how to go about gaining political power. And therefore, no matter how many copies of the magazine are sold, it's not going to make one iota of difference in the war on terror.
Patrick Basham, do you get the impression that there are many people around the world who today think that France would not have been terrorized and France would not be under a terror alert right now had it not been for a magazine?
No. The magazine is just one excuse. It's one item, one instrument that could be exploited. The grievances that extreme radical Muslims hold against the West are legion, and each country within the West has specific, is the target because of specific grievances. Some of them obviously overlapping. All of the countries that were directly involved in Iraq or directly involved in Afghanistan, that's a common grievance. But there are other ones that are out there. And the French, with their history in North Africa, the way in which their security services have and do operate, various quote-unquote mistakes, statements, policies of respective French presidents, all of these things are reasons why the French are a target. And, of course, what complicates us even further and adds more and more layers of grievances is that you have the external threat from Muslims, extreme radical terrorists who have never stepped foot in France. And then you have the threat, obviously now, very tangibly, from those who are French and who have become radicalized either within France or outside of the country and have returned. So whether it's the lone wolf, in Canada or in Australia or in the UK, etc., or whether it's a citizen who has left, being quote-unquote trained, and then come back to commit acts of terror, you're dealing with so many variables, so many potential reasons why someone or some group wants to attack your country. And the French are victims of this just as the rest of us are.
Mohammed Fahmy is a journalist. He was under suspicion, then under arrest. It's expected he'll be released within a few days from Egypt. He's a Canadian. But John Baird is down there to do a number of things with the Egyptians, including secure his release. Patrick Basham, what's your take on this?
Well, I think it is very likely that he is going to be released, and it will be a feather in John Baird's cap, and I think we can all be very pleased if that is the outcome. What we have to sort of step back and appreciate is that what the Egyptian government, it's a quote-unquote democratically elected president, but I mean it's a military coup that produced the government. It's the military that controls the government. What they are doing, what they have done by arresting these three journalists, one Egyptian, one Canadian, one Australian, working for Al Jazeera, is they have put down a marker against Al Jazeera as a proxy for the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is now legally a terrorist organization in Egypt, as it was before the quote-unquote revolution of 2011. And Al Jazeera, having been perceived in most places, but most specifically and strongly in Egypt as being pro-Muslim Brotherhood, has been targeted by the Egyptian government for supporting this allegedly terrorist group. So long as the Muslim Brotherhood has this relationship, to put it politely, with the Egyptian government, Al Jazeera and its employees are going to be targeted. So that doesn't make it a good thing, but the reality is that this Canadian journalist and his two colleagues are victims of the internal political dynamics of Egypt. They're not victims of anything they specifically have done, and that's why it will be, a great day if and when they're all released. He and his Australian colleague, they have the, if I can use this term in this context, they have the advantage of not being Egyptian. So the Egyptian government has a policy that, if we deport you, if there's a country we can deport you to, we will, we've made our point and we'll kick you out. And he is going to benefit from that. But it reflects what is a very, very serious situation in Egypt and how seriously and forcefully this Egyptian government is cracking down on and dealing what it believes to be a legitimate, as in real, tangible terrorist threat domestically.
Patrick Basham, thank you as always for the access and the visit. We appreciate it very much. Happy New Year.
Same to you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Patrick Basham's at the Democracy Institute in Washington.